A lot of people practice because of love. And because of love says, I'll do you a good turn because I fear what will happen if I don't. Because of the good turn you've done me, or because of the good turn I hope you'll do for me. But Jesus does not call us to because of love. He calls us to, in spite of love. And in spite of love does good even for your enemies. Not because of the good turn they've done you, but in spite of the harm they may have done you. In spite of love repays evil with kindness. In spite of love, as a matter of fact, is the unconditional love that God has for us. It's the love that caused Jesus to die for us while we were still sinners. It's the love that caused Jesus to die for us while we were still his enemies. In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, after Jesus tells us to love our enemies, he tells us something else that's rather startling. He tells us that we must be perfect. In fact, in Matthew 5:48, Jesus says, "You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Now, that begs some questions here. How in the world can we be perfect? Because we know only Jesus, according to the Bible, only Jesus lived his whole life without sinning. We're all flawed, so how can we become flawless? Certainly, we ought to imitate Christ, and that means seeking to conquer sin and working to conquer sin. But perfect, when Jesus says, "You be perfect," perfect, we need to understand in the original language of the New Testament actually means not flawless, but complete. Complete in things like labor, or you finished a job, or complete in growth, you're fully grown. So perhaps we could more accurately read the passage that we've just read, be complete as your heavenly Father is complete. Be complete by not neglecting any of Jesus' teachings. Be complete by not ignoring any part of God's will for your life. Perhaps in view of the emphasis that Jesus places on loving all people, even your enemies, Jesus is saying love completely, just as your heavenly Father loves completely. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, Jesus tells us more about perfect, complete love, the love that we're called to. So let's look at these verses. Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 1, Jesus says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people, in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward for your Father who is from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Jesus is saying that if we're going to love completely Jesus is saying love completely by loving all people, even your neighbors, even your enemies rather. Now Jesus is calling us to be complete by loving at all times and in all situations, even when we are performing to an empty room, even when nobody's watching. You may have noticed that people don't scratch dirty messages on the checkout counter with their pocket knives at the restaurant while the manager and the customers are watching. You never see that. Rather, people write dirty messages on the inside of the bathroom stall when they're all alone. That's when people do that kind of stuff. The truth is that we tend to become our true selves when we believe nobody is watching. The bad we do anonymously says a lot about us, and the good that we do anonymously also says a whole lot about us. There was a Sunday morning many years ago, about 13 years ago in San Diego. Crystal and I were expecting Nathaniel, and times were tight. And San Diego, in case you may not know, is... Thanks, Jack. I knew he was going to chime in. So Crystal and I, we're living in San Diego, and times are tight, and here come the ducks. And Crystal and I, we looked down as we were sitting in our spots for worship, And there in one of our seats was an anonymous envelope, just had our names on it. And in that envelope, there was a Walmart gift card for $500. And 13 years later, we still don't know who gave us that gift card. We do know that whoever it was understood Jesus' call to love completely by loving even when you don't get any credit or thanks for it. Now, right now, I'm putting my best foot forward. It's easy for me to act the right way when I'm up here and your eyes are on me, but what I'm doing when I don't think you're watching says a whole lot about who I really am. It's easy to behave well when you think you have an audience, when you think you'll be thought well of and get credit because of kindness, or when you think you'll be penalized if you fail to act in a kind way. But Jesus says, when you act in the best interest of others, even when you think the world isn't looking, even when you think the world is not noticing you, God will be pleased. When you really are the person, who you really are is the person you are when you think no one can help you or hurt you for the things that you're doing, when you think that nobody is watching at all. So imitate Jesus always. Love perfectly, love completely, love all people, even your enemies, and love all the time, even when you think you're performing for an empty room. And remember that your Heavenly Father is always watching. And when you imitate Jesus, even to an empty room, your Heavenly Father will be pleased.